Now it's my pleasure to introduce our guests to the Free Library stage tonight. From 2002 to 2012, Michele Norris served as co-host of NPR's flagship news program, All Things Considered. Woo-hoo, right? We love that. In addition to producing other profiles, interviews, and series for NPR News, she has contributed special reports for National Geographic, Time Magazine, ABC News, and Lifetime Television. The recipient of Emmy and Peabody Awards for her contribution to ABC's news coverage of 9/11, Ms. Norris is also the recipient of Dupont and Goldsmith Awards, and in 2009, she was named Journalist of the Year by the National Association of Black Journalists. I happen to be a member. Norris created the Race Card Project, an initiative to foster a wider conversation about race in America after the publication of her family memoir, The Grace of Silence. In our hidden conversation, she uses 10 years' worth of personal stories collected at the Race Card Project to offer a panoramic view of the ways in which Americans see themselves and each other. Joining her on stage is one of my favorite interviewers, Tamala Edwards, anchor of 6 ABC Action News Morning Edition. Let's give it up for her. She's here. We are so pleased to have them with us this evening. Please join me in welcoming Michele Norris and Tamala Edwards.
Good evening, good evening, good evening. It is always wonderful to be here, but it's particularly wonderful to be here tonight. We met, it has to have been...
Oh, are we going to say how long ago it was?
We don't have to say how long. We don't have to say how long, but a long time ago. And it is just wonderful to see your face and have you in Philadelphia and to have your amazing book.
Thank you.
Which I enjoyed reading every page and thinking about it, trying to figure out my 6 words. I think I've got 5 different versions. But let's get into it and talk about it a little bit. When you came up with 6 words, why did you decide 6, not 10, not 15? And what does it mean for people to distill it down?
Okay. Before I answer, can I just say how wonderful it is to be here with you? This is a reunion for us. We used to work together at ABC News for the mothership, and it's just, one of us has not aged at all. Well, you know what they say about...
Well,
yeah. So it's just really special to be here. And I have family in Philly, and they're here in the front row, so it's really special to be here with my Philly family. Love you all so much. And I was here 14 years ago when I wrote my first book, so it's kind of a reunion to come back. And that was when I first started the Race Card Project. And so the question, why 6 words? I had written this book about my family's very complex racial legacy, and I didn't think people wanted to talk about race. I thought I'd have to drag them into the conversation or entice them in some way, and so that's why I printed these postcards. This is actually a vintage model, one of the original postcards. The ones you have now that you're holding are a little bit bigger. These first ones we printed at a do you remember the Red Door Salon? It was on Wisconsin Avenue. I printed at I printed at the Kinko's next to the Red Door Salon. And my parents were postal workers, and so I may have been doing my part to support the U.S. Postal Service. But when I printed these first cards, my mom let me know that these original cards were the wrong size. So she wanted me to go and catch all of them. They were already out in the world. And the reason I chose 6 words is I knew that people would be familiar with a 6-word concept. Mm-hmm. I knew that if you took something complicated and reduced it to one sentence, it would be useful. I do that as a writer. I still do that as a writer, try to bring something down to one sentence. And there was a rhythm to 6 words. There's just a sort of pentameter to 6 words that I liked. And I knew that I couldn't ask for a sentence. Because if I asked for a sentence, people would give me a paragraph. Right. and they would add hyphenated words and clauses, and if I asked for a paragraph, people would say, "Oh, I ain't got time for that." It would be too much of an ask. So 6 words seemed like it was a good place to land, and the power of distillation is that you get to the heart of something. And if you're a cook, if you reduce something, if you're, look who I'm talking to about cooking. You're in your family, I'm sure that you know a thing or two about reduction, but it takes on a different flavor when you just bring it down to its essence. And so I thought that's what you could get to in just 6 words. People would have to make choices about what is most important. And when you look at the 6-word stories, it's really interesting in the distillation of how much power it has. There's such, truly an economy of words packs a certain punch because it's not adorned with, you can't back off language, right? You can't use a word that would help you obfuscate or avoid something. You just kind of have to go straight to it. And it was pretty clear to me pretty quickly when the cards started to come back that people would go straight to it, and that there was often art or poetry in the way that they composed their 6-word stories.
You live in the world as a Black woman. You have covered race from a number of different angles in a lot of different places. It was a feature in your first book. You're not new to the topic. Did this project in some way change your perception of it, teach you something different, surprise you in some way, even with all of that?
It did all of that. It did all of that. And I have to say, I've lived in black skin all my life. I've been a proud Black woman all of my life, but I have not been someone who has ran toward the race beat. Mm-hmm. And I had a reason for doing that, because if you're a person of color in a newsroom, you're suddenly really popular in February. I mean, and you know what I'm talking about. People who have nothing to do with you for the rest of the year, suddenly in February. Well, how about doing like a 6-part series that they would not be interested in any other part of the year? And that always sort of irked me, that our racial coverage was itself segregated. And I was afraid that if I officially went on the race beat, that I might be pigeonholed and then limited. And I wanted a big portfolio. I wanted to cover, and it's interesting, I wanted to cover politics, for instance. Mm-hmm. And if you covered race, you didn't cover politics, which is so ridiculous because our politics is so often and so much about race. And we're often asking, did race play a role in this?
Yes, it did.
And the question is, what role did race play? Because it's so often there. But so I didn't want to become the official race beat reporter, because I wanted to cover politics. I wanted to cover social policy. I wanted to cover foreign policy. I wanted to travel. I wanted to write about culture. I wanted to do a lot of different things. At this point in my life, this is the biggest part of my docket. And it has taught me so many things. It is a lesson, it has taught me lessons that are as valuable as anything I've learned in a newsroom or a classroom. And it continues. Every day is a opportunity to learn some new dimension of the racial experience. So there are little lessons that just come from learning about something about life in Wyoming that I didn't know, about listening to, and we'll probably talk about this, but listening to white people talk about race, because the majority of the submissions have come from white Americans, and surprise, I didn't expect that. And there have been bigger lessons about, I guess one of the biggest lessons for me is what happens when you allow individuals to set the agenda and talk about what is important to them. Because as journalists, what we talk about is not often the same as what people talk about. There may be some connection, but we're often talking about race because something merits our attention. Somebody stepped in something, somebody crossed a milestone, somebody said something, somebody did something, there's some conflict somewhere, something explosive. And the stories, when you read the book, and notice I said when you read the book, you will see that they're just intimate. They're very intimate. They're about people talking about their lives, about what happens in their kitchens and bathrooms and their commute, their office, their campus, their neighbors, their alley. It's just, they're very personal stories. And it made me realize that I was missing something. That even when I went out into the world, even if I tried to go out and capture these stories, I'm not sure I would have ever captured what's in this book unless I let people come to the table, the proverbial table, on their own terms. And that's what this book has allowed, is just there's a basket on the table, come when you want.
Put in it what you want. And it's even the people who say they don't want to talk about it anymore, it's clear they're spending a lot of time talking about it and thinking about it.
Isn't it interesting that there are
Yes.
several cards where people, can it just be over? Can we stop talking about race? But here's my 6 words and my 500-word backstory. So even when they don't want to talk about it, they still want to be heard. And that's another lesson, is that there are a lot of people who want to be heard. And I created this project because I thought no one wanted to talk about race, and I just have to own the fact that it was created based on a mistaken assumption. I was wrong. I was wrong. We're told that people don't want to talk about race. We've archived more than 500,000 stories. A lot of people do, but they don't want to have the kind of conversation about race that is forced on them.
They want to really lead in it or choose how to be in it. The book is a mix of things. Some of it is simply what the 6 words. People were able to send in the cards, then they could do digital submissions and talk longer, and sometimes there's that. Sometimes there are bits of reporting that you did previously, and sometimes you go deeper with people based on their cards. And I wondered, what led to a card being one where you said, I have to pick up the phone and know more. I've got to call this person.
You know, I can't say it's a formula, because I have a long list of cards that I want to get to. There's a card that came in today just to give you an example, from a gentleman in Charlottesville who said, I was raised by a bigot. I've spent most of my life being a bigot. I'm writing this card to let you know that people can change.
Oof.
And he lives in Charlottesville, and when they marched in Charlottesville, he stood arm in arm with his neighbors to say, we're not putting up with this.
Wow.
And I want to get on the phone and call him, and because I'm on book tour and because I have to find time, it may be weeks or months before I get to him, but I do have that list, you know, of people that I want to reach out to. At the same time, there are a couple of other categories that I reach out to, so I don't want to only reach out to people whose cards, like, you know, titillate something in me, you know, animate something in me. So sometimes I just reach blindly and do an oral history. Just, you know, who am I going to talk to today? Just call someone. And then sometimes I will reach out to people. We have a lot of cards where people will say something like, there's only one race, the human race.
In your basement, that's true, but
Yeah.
when you step out in the world.
Right. Or there's categories of cards that are just sort of, you know, kind of, and what I realize is when I call some of those people and talk to them, and they tell me these incredible stories, and it's like, and this was the 6 words you chose.
Right.
So sometimes there is a calculated reason for why I'm calling someone, but I really do try to mix it up a little bit and embrace something that's a little bit more random, so that I just recognize my own blind spots, and that allows me to reach a broader spectrum of people.
I wonder if, in their own way, despite what they're telling you, that's their way of getting at some hope. They know it's not true, but they wish it were. And so why does it...
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the themes that come out in the book. And one that really sits with you in so many different ways is blackness equals fear.
Yeah.
And I'm going to read a couple of the 6 words for you and then tell you about a young man named Che. I wrote one sentence from Che. Page 87. And this tells you where we are. My jacket came with a hood. Rocky wore a hood. Kill him. My son can wear a hoodie. We don't understand what scares us. It's all over the place. And then page 317.
317? Okay, let's go.
Nope, that's we're gonna. Black teen boys scare white people. Tim McGovern wrote about a bunch of kids at the playground, and all the parents are talking about everyday things, and then kids start to disappear as the kids get older. And the things that he would hear, oh, we're worried the school has discipline issues in the upper grades. I wouldn't feel like my daughter is safe there. What's going on? These are the same families that have known you since your kids were running around naked in the fountain as toddlers, but all of a sudden, they've turned into young black men, and that scares off white people. We all lose out.
Yeah.
And you talked to a young black man named Che, and he described the way that he makes himself small. He just gives out greetings. He does little things that are meant to telegraph, I'm not a threat. And the words that he uses put up this wall that makes me a one-dimensional figure that can't exist as a person, or not even a person, but as an semblance of a person, rather than a threat. What does it mean for a child, essentially, to decide the safest thing is to be in a semblance
Isn't that
of
amazing?
a person?
He's 18 years old, and he's talking about being in a semblance of a person. He's talking, I mean, this is the kind of thing that Richard Wright, would write about, that James Baldwin would write about. His mother, Che's mother, I talked to Che because his mother sent in 6 words, I wish he was a girl. And she sent it in with this beautiful picture of him. They're on a school bus, and they were just at a Diwali celebration, and so they're covered with all this multicolored powdery paint. And she sent that 6-word story in the day that the gritty video footage was released of Tamir Rice. And the police coming up on Tamir Rice in front of that gazebo in Ohio, thinking that he was carrying a gun, and they took that child's life. And at that point, Tamir and Che were the same age, and she was crying, and she didn't want Che to hear her, and so she's stifling her sobs. She heard one of the Race Card Project's segments on NPR. She went to her computer and typed out, I wish he was a girl, and hit the send button. And she said, I don't even know why I did it, but she said it was like a silent scream. It was a way for her to say something. And then years later, I talked to the two of them together, and this is when Che is explaining, yeah, Mom, I understand why you might feel that way. This is how I live my life. Can I ask the audience a question?
Sure.
Right quick. So what he's talking about is also encompassed in a 6-word story that often was on my business card. At the Race Card Project, we have a small but mighty team, and we chose 6-word stories to put on our business cards. So Amrit Dhillon, for instance, is South Asian, she's Indian, and her 6 words were, no, I don't like spicy food. Because we'd go out to lunch and people would put all the spicy, all the hot sauce in front of her, and she's like, gives me indigestion, I can't do it, I don't want it. Melissa Baer, who's been with me since the very beginning running this project, her 6 words on her card were often, Grandma, you can't say that anymore. And the 6 words I often chose were, lady, I don't want your purse. And it's really something to give somebody a business card and that, whoa, what is this about? But the person several people have sent some version of that in. The first person I think was Hiawatha Northington. He lives in Tennessee. And he's talking about he's talking about Che's dilemma, what it's being an semblance of a person, what it's like to be a black man who goes through life and experiences these little microaggressions that just cut. So I want to ask the audience a question. I want you to be honest in answering it. How many of you have walked down the street, have walked down the frozen food aisle in the grocery store, have walked onto an elevator and noticed that people on the elevator, in the frozen fruit aisle, on the street, are just grabbing their purses a little bit closer, are touching their wallet, are making themselves physically vulnerable just because you're there? How many of you have had that experience? Raise your hand. Okay, most of the people, because the lighting in here is good, I can see who've raised their hands are people of color. On the other hand, again, let's be honest, how many people have had the reverse experience? You don't even know why you do it. You just, is my wallet still there? Is it safe? Let me just grab my purse up under me a little bit tighter. Driving down the street in a neighborhood and you see people on a street corner and they look a little bit different and they're wearing a hood, it's cold outside. They maybe have a reason to wear a hood, but the hood makes you nervous. And you reach over and you try to be slick about it and hit the lock on the car. Have you ever done that? Be honest, raise your hand. Have you ever pulled your purse a little bit close? Thank you for your honesty. You're seeing flip sides of that coin. Now, for those of you who admit to hitting the car lock and you try to be slick and the car lock is really loud and it makes all that noise, and then the person on the street corner looks at you and you're like totally busted and you feel bad.
And they
they're
feel
like,
worse.
Yeah, and they feel worse. They're like, lady, I don't want your purse. You drive on and move on. They don't. They don't. They know that they have to forever inoculate your fears. And I was in New York recently and someone gave me one of their 6-word cards. See, we collect those cards you have. We actually collect them and archive them. And it was a perfect retort for this moment, so I'm going to share it with you. Tam, the card said, I'm not intimidating. You are intimidated. And I love that because it just sort of says, I'm just going to take the cup and turn it around so the handle is in your direction. Because this isn't about me. I'm on my way to work. This is about something that is inside of you or inside of us as a society. And a little teeny story from an 18-year-old who talks about being in a semblance of a man maybe will help us think about. It may not stop us from doing it, but at least we're aware of it. Like, why am I doing it? What makes me do that?
Well, I thought the bookend to that there were a couple of entries from white women who've been had their purses taken or some sort of interaction, and everybody says, was it a black guy? And one said they were almost disappointed every time I said it wasn't. Yeah. What is that about? And at that point I said, I don't know if we can fix this.
But do you remember when we were at ABC, there was an intern, and I was trying to remember her name because I knew we were going to be together, and I can picture her, but I can't remember her name, and I'm really sorry about that. Because it's a factor of age probably, but she was leading the charge to change the library B-roll system. Because when you work on the news and something bad happens and there's this stuff called B-roll where you go to the videotape library and you just catch some B-roll, and we need a perp walk, we need a inner city shot, we need, something that shows urban blight, and the B-roll perpetrates exactly what we're talking about, because it's like, does everybody wear curlers? Are only black people poor? Do only black and Latino neighborhoods have broken windows? But we were, and this has really made me think about my journey as a storyteller and how much or how often we contribute to that and how we need to find ways to interrogate that.
I wanted to talk a little bit, because there were the entries with people saying it doesn't, well, from white people, and 500,000 entries, the majority from white people, and it's all over the board. Some people who say, I feel this deeply, it's a huge issue. Other people who say it's not an issue at all. I love the story from the young woman who was stopped by the police and said, would I have been killed if I was black? And she said, this is not a matter of an opinion. Pepsi or Coke is a matter of opinion. This is the truth. But the reason why it matters, and some of your writing, you lay out that a lot of the historical figures we talk about, it's not that long ago that they were here. And one woman, and I told you I wanted you to read as much of this as you wanted, this one made me stop, close the book, and think about it. Page 372, last Jim Crow generation in charge. And I think she just captured the degree to which it's in the ether, if you think it's not there.
This is from Cleo Brown in South Carolina. And she sent a picture of herself in. If you notice, the book is of unusual design. There are 287 photos. And I wanted to make sure you could meet some of the people who were telling their stories. She says, I and others in our late 50s and up are members of the last generation of children to grow up under the Jim Crow legal system that required every white person to discriminate against every black person, whether or not they were racist. This extreme inequality left a residue that caused us not to immediately see another person, but to first see what we thought the other person's race represented. We could see people from different races doing the same thing and think two very different thoughts about them. We are the children whose relatives were lynched or shot, and we are also the children whose parents did the lynchings and the shootings. We are the children harassed while integrating white schools, and we are also the children who did the harassing of whose parents funded lawyers. I don't have my glasses, I'm sorry. Or whose parents funded lawyers to maintain an inferior education for some. We are the children whose parents' livelihoods and reputations were destroyed via the media, and we are also the children whose parents wrote and spoke to move the masses to hate in order to achieve personal agendas. We are the children of almost a whole state of black parents who lost their right to vote in a single year, and we are the children who, as adults, have applied their parents' tactics to gutting the Voting Rights Act. We are the children who feared the fiery cross, and we are also the children who stood hand in hand with our fathers encircling the cross. We are the children who may have never gone to school with anyone of the opposite race. Now we work side by side, and we, and those we mentor, teach and supervise and make employment decisions. We are jurors and judges, and we set policy and political agendas. After all, we are the age to be in charge, to set direction for others, but for many, our childhood Jim Crow foundation still frames our worldviews because we failed to challenge or even acknowledge what Jim Crow taught all of us and what has become a part of our automatic response system. We can't solve what we are unwilling to acknowledge or confront.
And that sat with me that we don't talk about the fact that so many people, and we're not talking elderly people, we're talking middle-aged, getting to elderly people, grew up with different schools, different fountains, different treatments. We say it doesn't matter anymore, and we don't talk about the fact that the people in front of us, that we lived through it.
Look at this room. I mean, really, look at who's in the room. Look to your right and to your left. Look behind you. Look at the composition in this room. Now, we're in the North. We are not in the Deep South. So it might not have been illegal to have a room that looked like this. But let's be honest, even in Philadelphia, within my lifetime, you wouldn't have a room that looked like this without some people getting really agitated about it. Some of us, I'm not going to say some of you, some of us are old enough to remember how afraid people were when white kids started listening to Negro music? You remember that? And one of the things that they were so afraid of is that they kept the schools separate, they kept the sports teams separate, because they understood that if people actually got close enough to each other, they might see something in the other person that they recognized. That's one of the reasons that we had such steep segregation. They didn't want people to be together. Because as Michelle Obama says, it's hard to hate up close. Mm-hmm. I remember I did a story for NPR about the marshals who took Ruby Bridges to school and who took the students throughout Louisiana to school through a wall of hatred. And one of the things I remembered that one of the agents told me is he didn't want the assignment. They purposely chose Southern agents because they thought that it would be easier for them to deal with the screaming masses and that it might be easier for them to deal with the law enforcement, local law enforcement, that didn't much want this integration thing either. And he said he had to go pick up one of the kids. It wasn't Ruby Bridges, it was one of the other three girls that get much less attention. And when he went to the house, he looked in the china cabinet of the girl's parents, and he recognized the china in the china cabinet, and that was a moment for him, a lightning bolt moment, because they had the same china as his wife had. No, notice that his wife had. And he said, this guy must be as pissed off as I am. She spends all that money on china that we never use. And that's what I remember, is like suddenly that person was real to him, you know, because he thought, they're, working class household. He worked for the government, made decent money, but not a lot of money. And yet, he saw a couple things. He saw that they're proud people. They too had china. They displayed it. They, their house was beautiful, lace tablecloth, he said. And he realized that he saw something in that man. He thought, he doesn't care about that china, but it's important to her. And he said that was the moment that he realized, okay, I'm not here just to do a job. I have to protect this. And he talked about how he told the little girl, just take my hand. Every morning when he walked her to school, he said, just take my hand. And it was one of the proudest things he ever did. And in fact, when he passed away, he had his ashes spread in front of the school that he took that little girl to. And it was, and he was also the subject of a discrimination case. So, this is the arc of his life. We are many things, but Jim Crow is not
Forever ago.
No, it's like the sign in if you drive a car, in your rearview mirror, it says objects are closer than they appear. It's a lot closer to us than we like to think it is.
And the book isn't just broken into black and white. In fact, you make a point that so many other people wrote in, people from Asian, Latino, biracial backgrounds, talking about different things that had to do with them. And that was sort of a theme that they feel left out of the conversation, and they can never not be an immigrant. They can be 5 generations here, and where are you really from is the question. But there's so many depths to it in their own families.
Yeah.
They get a hard time. You speak Spanish, you don't speak Spanish. What color are you?
Right.
All kinds of things go into it. And the people that wrote in repeatedly, I'm glad my baby looks white.
Oh, yeah. Or will he look American enough? Whatever that means. And, everybody in the world is hung up on hue. We've received cards from more than 100 countries, and that's clear. That people, you could be in the northernmost Nordic countries, and people will divide themselves, dark hair, light hair, eye color, that the gradations of color. But the honesty, you asked what surprised me, the honesty continues to surprise me. I honor it, I appreciate it, I feel like I'm the conservator of something very special because people have gifted me their truth. But to say that out loud, and I think that they're saying that out of anguish, but also because they're hoping that by putting that out there, maybe things will change. Maybe we'll start to think about, why is it so important that my child look white? One of the people who said that was a black man, who has a white stepson. And, he's basically saying, I just, I have to still give him a talk, but I don't have to worry about him in the same way that I would if he was out in the world with brown skin. There's a chapter in the book where I talk about how I keep, my family's here. What's at the front door? What do you see when you walk into the right on the table? Picture of the family. I keep a picture of my family at the front door. The reason I keep a really lovely, smiling picture of us leaning into each other is because I live in an integrated neighborhood, but people of color are in the minority. And I need to know that if someone entered my house, that they would know that I live in it. That I'm not mistaken for someone who's intruding in my own house. That my son, it's an insurance policy. And we actually had to cash it in one night, that insurance policy, when my son tripped the alarm on a midnight fridge raid. And actually, it was in wee hours in the morning, and the police came to the house. And he's wearing his, sorry, Ravens.
His dad's from Baltimore, it's acceptable.
He's wearing his Raven stuff, and it's the middle of the night, and his hair is sticking up all over the place, and he's got his slippers on, and they see, it's what we were taught, it's Che. They see a young black kid in a foyer, and they're like, you live here? Where are your parents? We were out of town. How long have you lived here? He's like doing the math, because we had moved, and he's like, was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago? And then he remembers the picture, and he points to the picture, and he says, I live here, see, that's us. And I thought, I did that thinking I'd never have to use it. And when he told me this story, boy, was I glad that picture was there. It's different for some of us.
Another thing that came to me as I was reading the various entries is that there's a lot of hurt and loneliness in race, and a lot of people. A feeling, for some people it's home and it's connection, but for a lot of people, you are forever the wanderer.
Yeah. And wish I had a black friend.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a lot of regret.
Mm-hmm. The woman who did not go sit with the girl in the lunchroom by herself because she was black and nobody else would.
And she lives with that. All fifth graders except Mavis. You know, everybody's invited to a birthday party, and her parents say, I'm sorry, we can't have Mavis. Now, I want to find these two women, you know, and I want to put them together. And I wonder if you know, for the woman who didn't get to invite her friend Mavis, it's all these years later, she's still thinking about it. I wonder if Mavis is still thinking about it. Or is Mavis like moved on? You know, I don't know. But there is the walls that we create. It makes me think of another, you know, you start thinking in 6 words. You watch TV, ooh, that's a good 6 words. You know, you see it in advertising, you start thinking about it, but also the 6 words, they live in my head. So I see something happen, and I was like, oh, that's one of those 6-word stories. And when you're talking about regret and you're talking about loneliness, hardest jails to escape are gateless. Like, we've created these strictures for ourselves, but we're not in Robben Island. You know, there's no guard outside the door. There's no lock and key. We're not splitting atoms. You know, we can solve this. We can change this. We just have to figure out if we want to do it and if we want to push back against. There are a lot of people in America right now who are invested, who are deeply invested in our divisions. They're spending money. They're conducting focus groups. They're figuring out what's the best language to keep people divided. What are the things that people fear so we can poke and needle at that and make them feel more vulnerable, more afraid? They do that because it benefits them. Does it benefit you? No, I'm asking that. Because their benefits to them are clear. You know, they hold on to power, they maintain systems of authority, maybe they just maintain comfort, the comfort of knowing that I'm better than somebody else. And that might not put money in the bank, but I feel good about that, knowing that I just am a little bit better than somebody else. But do you really benefit from that? Individually, as a community? And if you think the answer is no, then that's something we can change. It's not physics. It's psychology. It's the way we choose to relate to people.
We're down. I'm going to ask a couple more quick questions, and then we'll go to you guys to be thinking about what you might want to ask. And you note that a lot of white people wrote back in, and that was surprising to you. And I learned a lot of things. I didn't realize Scotch is a slur.
I didn't know that either.
Scotch tape, don't say it. Scot-free, don't say it. The things you learn.
We need to explain that, because now people are like, what?
But, you know, in general, like, if all those entries, why do you think so many white people wrote in? And what did you take away from it the most?
I'll get to the Scotch tape in a minute. I don't know why so many white Americans wrote in. I think it probably has something, I just talked about this earlier today, I think it has something probably to do with leading by example. So we had, you know, at first I thought it was maybe because I was on NPR for so long, because the majority of the audience at NPR is white. But I haven't been on NPR for years. And we have cards that have come from all over the country and all over, you know, more than 100 other countries. I think what happened is when we created the website, where we were not just collecting stories, but we were projecting stories. The inbox was so interesting that we wanted a place where people could see what we were seeing. So we created a website, and people could start to see what other people were saying and then submit their own story. And I think when people saw, oh, someone from Wyoming, someone from Idaho, someone whose last name appears to be Polish, or maybe is Greek, or maybe is Irish, wow, they're telling their stories? This is about race. I wasn't expecting this. And then maybe they felt encouraged or emboldened to share their story. So the rules of engagement, without saying, this is the Race Car Project, we'd like to hear from a lot of white people. I think a lot of white people maybe came and saw that others had shared their story and decided to share those too. I actually don't know the answer to that. At some point, maybe we'll partner with, an academic institution and look into that. The other thing could possibly be that it was a conversation where they finally felt invited. Because if you were an institution, if you're at your church, your temple, your school, your community organization, if there is a diversity committee, chances are it's probably not all that diverse. I mean, I would go through this when my kids were younger, and they would have diversity meetings in their schools, and I was like, why don't we just call this the Black People's Meeting? Because it's not at all diverse. I mean, if we're actually trying to improve diversity at the school, this room needs to be much more diverse than it actually is. If not, let's just, let's call it an affinity group or something like that, but let's stop calling it. And so in this case, I think it really was an open-ended, open-armed invitation, and maybe people felt like, oh yeah, I can pull up a chair and I can stay. And a lot of people came, and to be honest, if you read the book, when you read the book, you will see that a lot of people on the far right have submitted submissions also. Cards like white privileged, earned it, enjoy it. Chest out, that's my anthem. And we include those cards too. And there are some cases where people have come to the site to criticize, to say, why are you still talking about race? Or, this is just another one of these woke, liberal agenda things. And they submit their story and we include it. And they're like, oh.
Didn't expect that.
Didn't expect that, yeah. I have a seat at the table. And that may be modeling also. Okay, so we get to have our say also. The benefit of that is because we have a large enough number of submissions, and a large enough number that includes big cohorts. So a lot of people of color, a lot of Asians, a lot of, not as many Native Americans as we would like. But a big enough number of various cohorts that we don't have to run the risk of a small number of stories representing a big, diverse cohort. And just a word about the Scotch tape. So Ian Malcolm, I believe was his name. This is why I don't know where my keys are, because I have all these 6-word stories in my head. He sent in a card saying Scotch tape does not stick here. And he talked about coming from a family that was, they were Scottish. And I did some research on it, and it was really interesting. For a time, thriftiness was attached, you're nodding like you understand this, it was attached to being Scottish. And so when 3M created Scotch tape, it has the plaid on the outside of it? It's because it was meant to fix things, because the Scots were considered cheap, but not in a good way.
Right.
Not, there's a difference between thrifty and cheap. And so for a lot of grocery stores, like Safeway used to have a special brand of low-cost items that had a little Scotty on the label and plaid. You remember the lunchbox that we used to carry that was plaid? It was all about being thrifty, but it was like taking a rather pejorative aspect of assumptions about people who were, I did not know this.
The things you learn.
Did not know this. And it was another example of the way this project continually educates me.
My last question is sort of a pullback moment, because you've spent 15 years thinking about this topic, and in the end you wrap up and you say common ground is impossible. We have to be bridge builders. We're not going to be in the same place, but we have to be able to go back and forth. And a lot of people are wondering about this moment we're in. Is it 1850? Is it something different? And I guess I have are we going forward or are we going back? I look at the recent Claudine Gay. You didn't just do a crappy job. No, you're there because you're black. Here we are again. The DEI, get the books out. Everything is woke. And there's a part of me that is scared and Woodrow Wilson, which if you go back and you read history, for so long everybody talked about international relations, but he undid an untold amount of black progress by saying you can't have these jobs and you can't be here anymore. And I find myself in this moment right when we thought, if you'd asked me if I'd be having this conversation when I was 22, I would not.
Yeah.
But could we be regressing? And so I think the book, I found myself wondering as I read it, is there hope when you look at your grandbaby to go forward? Or are we waiting to be back in that moment again?
It feels like where race is concerned, we are doing a foxtrot. We're moving forward, we're moving backwards. We're moving forward, we're moving backwards. And it's a little, it's not as elegant as a beautiful dance. It's a little jerkier than that. But often you say, are we moving backwards or are we progressing? Often we're doing both at the same time. Woodrow Wilson undid a whole lot of things, and yet we elected a black president. So
Eventually.
And maybe, took longer than it might have otherwise, but people still figured out how to move forward. Half of our country thinks we're heading towards civil war. I mean, that is one of the things that truly astonishes me, and that we're kind of calm about it. If you really think that, it feels like the house is on fire, like, the soles of our shoes are melting and we're just kind of just sitting here, And yet I do remain hopeful. And I believe something slightly different than I used to. So for the first 5 decades of my life, I thought that we were automatically heading towards someplace better. I just thought that the momentum was just going to continue to push us forward, that we were becoming ever more diverse, ever more open, that people would be uncomfortable about it, but that people understood the value of diversity, that we would always sort of move forward. I think we probably will, but only if people work toward that. That it's not something that will happen automatically. It's not anaerobic. It won't happen, without oxygen. It doesn't just happen. That it's, in the book I quote Eric Holder, who twisted the quote from Martin Luther King, basically saying the moral arc of justice, the moral arc of the universe moves toward justice. But Eric's twisted it slightly to say, but only if we reach out and grab it and make sure that it goes. Because trust me, there are people who were just fine with it going in another direction, and they are using their energy to move it in another direction. So this is really a case right now where on a lot of levels, whether it's our environment, whether it's our political environment, whether it's kind of families that we want to build, it depends on how you decide to show up in the world. Whether you decide to show up in the world. And people often think that I can't do anything, it's just too big an issue. I keep talking about the lessons, but truly there are so many lessons inside this book. So many of the lessons for me show that we think of history being made by big, momentous figures that we read about in history books. And you realize that a lot of it is just, a neighbor deciding to knock on someone's door and say, welcome. A teacher deciding to try to get to know the students that she thinks that she's afraid of. A coach figuring out how to get a team to all move in the same direction. This is the example that I use, and I think sports actually provides a fantastic example of that. I mean, I know how crazy y'all are about sports in Philadelphia. And I know y'all don't agree with each other in Philadelphia. I know that the city is really riven politically, and yet look at the stadium. For 3 hours on a Sunday, everybody can row in the same direction. And the sports teams, the players and the owners don't always agree politically or otherwise, but they figure it out. I think if we find more examples of people, I actually wish there was something like a Nobel Prize for people who are bridge builders, who figure out how to help, because I think that's what, for young people, and yes, I'm talking about you. For young people, the greatest skill that I think that they're going to need is not taught well or at all in our schools. It's not taught in business school. It's barely even talked about. And that is the skill of taking a group of people who do not agree with each other and figuring out how to make them productive. That is a skill. If it's happening, you think it's just, oh, they're so lucky they all figure out. No, it's not luck. It's a skill. It's a skill, and we don't teach it. And if some of you look like you probably lead something in your own life, and I bet you're dealing with that, and I bet it gives you indigestion. You've lost some stomach lining behind it. It's really hard. And it's a skill set that we need to develop as we are a country that is a bit more divided, and as we are facing people who are trying to divide us. We need people who are bridge builders who can figure out how to keep people together, tethered in some way, when they don't agree with each other.
I think if you took the lessons from the book, to what degree can you be honest, and to what degree can you make a place where somebody thinks they can speak?
The Democratic Party is very concerned that black men are going to vote for Donald Trump. How do you feel about that?
How do I feel about whether or not they will vote for Donald Trump? Well, the last poll that I saw showed that the Republican Party is making inroads among some voters of color, both in the Black and the Latino community. And I think that, as with any election year and any party, if you want votes, you have to go out and earn them. You can't expect that people are just going to show up. You have to speak to their interests. You have to figure out how to speak to their interests in different regions and not do it in a way that is so homogenous that you have a one-size-fits-all message. If a party is making inroads, it's usually because they are messaging in a way that is reaching someone, or that that group sees something in a leader that is attractive to them. And I think that this is a very consequential election. And no matter what your politics are, I'm careful, about talking about politics. But I will say this, whatever your politics are, that you can't take anything for granted in this year. This is not it's not really a spectator sport right now. And so I don't know if that answers your, I have not done the polling. I don't know exactly where the, numbers are. I looked at a number in a specific state recently because I was doing a little bit of research on that. But I will say one more thing about this. The ways of reaching people and the ways of messaging, the old systems are different. And so there are channels of communication that the parties locally and nationally are going to have to figure out how to use more effectively, because social media has just changed the way that people access information. And there are sort of sub rosa messaging campaigns that are very, very, very effective that are changing the political calculus.
I just want to share my 6 words and
Please.
a comment and a question. All right, sorry. My 6 words is, and I heard this just 2 weeks ago for the first time, so it was right on time. My 6 words is: race is a product of racism. So that goes along with my beliefs. And the comment is, when you said you keep the picture of your family in the front of the house. And when you first said it, I was like, I wonder why. But I have a friend who was shot by the police in his own house. So I'm going to share that with him. He survived it, but I see that is important. And my question is, what do you think about the movie Origin as relates to your book?
I haven't seen it yet.
It's
And I
amazing.
hate to admit that. I have, Ava's a friend of mine, and because of the book tour, and the movie came out just as this was, so I am actually home this weekend, and that is very high on my agenda. Ava's a friend, and Isabel is a friend, and I've, of course, read Cast, and I can't wait to see, what she's done with it. I know it's special. I talked to her when she was, putting this together, and she was taking a lot of risks, both in the way she told the story and the way she's sending it out into the world. I think it's really righteous that she's done it outside of the studio system. So if you all haven't seen it, support it, because it's an important film, and she's basically doing something that is, she's being a renegade here in the way that she's sending it out in the world. So I'm sorry that I can't respond more specifically to it. It's an important film, and I also didn't want to see it like in a, with a link on an airplane, with like,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
with like people. I want to sit with this film, right? I want to see it in the right space. So that's why I haven't seen it yet. Thanks for your comment and your question and your 6 words.
Here. I think so much, you were talking a lot and giving credit to the people willing to share their stories, but so much of it as well as you being willing to listen. And I feel like there's a lot of work in that, and I'd just be curious to hear from you about, were there times where you were like, I'm not going to take that story in, or that might be too much, or somebody on your team maybe would take it, just kind of the methods of doing all these interviews, because it feels like you're taking a lot on as well as the person interviewing and then writing this book.
I'm glad that you mentioned listening, because when we talk about communicating around race, the emphasis is usually placed on what is said as opposed to what is heard. And even what is said and what is heard are often two different things, right? Many of you will go out of the room and you will have a different interpretation of what you think you heard me say. So there is power in listening, and if we're going to, talking about during the work, part of it is like being willing to show up, to speak your truth, but also being willing to make space for someone else to tell their story. I do take in a lot. It sometimes takes an emotional toll. I include and have printed and have archived stories that don't sit well inside me. I have talked to people who say things that I don't agree with, but I also believe that there's some benefit in talking to people that you don't agree with. Because of the work that I do and because I'm trying to hold a mirror up to America, I look in dark places and invite others to do so also, not just to be provocative, but to help us understand how steep the hill is, to help us understand what's really happening in America. There have been really difficult days, though, and I can take sometimes more than my staff can. We have a small but mighty team, and I always tell people, if it's too much, it's okay. Just dismount gracefully and go back to it, or not, or say, you know what, this is one I can't do. Because the other thing is, you don't know what's going to trigger someone. What's going to really animate something inside them that's very painful. So that's sort of our rules of engagement. And we don't publish anything that is overtly threatening. And there's a difference between umbrage and hate. And so we try to figure out how to walk that line.
Are you signing books tonight?
I am, and I just wanted, I think there's someone in the room who's in the book. I was hoping you would raise your hand. Do you mind telling us why you chose your 6 words and why you?
Oh, wow, okay. I was sort of like semi-prepared for this.
Okay.
So my name is Beth Schumacher. I'm from Collegeville, Pennsylvania. And my 6 words were, no, my children are not adopted. And so I had a tough decision to make. I did this, I'm thinking it was probably, I was thinking like 2017, maybe 18, I think I sent that in. And at the time, I think the little hand was my youngest, who's now
It's a really beautiful photo. Your hands are
page 261. Which I didn't even have that memorized until we were down here, and I said to my daughter, this is my oldest, I think I better probably figure out what page it's on before I get it. She said it was 3 something, it was actually 2, we were wrong. Anyway,
It is gorgeous.
so yeah, there's the picture. And that's my youngest, Torin, who is now 13. He'll be 14 in May, and so I think he was in 3rd grade. It was before COVID, I remember that. And at the time, I was working on a committee for our local school district we had entitled it Empathy 21, and we had some very lofty goals, some of which were achieved, and unfortunately many more that were not. But we aspired to make some big changes in our local district, especially in our elementary school that he was a part of at the time. So he's now an 8th grader. But anyway, the words I chose to just let the photo sit as it was, as opposed to the long paragraph, which, as you said, I didn't have time for. But the backstory is that I am adopted. I was adopted when I was an infant from Chicago, Illinois. And I was part of a match set with 2 blonde-haired, blue-eyed parents. And my parents were never asked if I was adopted. The assumption was I was theirs and they were mine because we looked the same and we were a match set. So it was the juxtaposition of the reality that that I grew up with, that it was never questioned because we looked alike, versus my children. I was asked that almost every day, when I was younger. The assumption was they were adopted. Every once in a while, you'd be surprised. I actually got asked if I was the babysitter.
There are a lot of those
for a
cards,
black family.
too. Yeah.
So I got asked that too. Yeah, and I saw that. There was a new one on your wall that was speaking to that. So that was why I picked those words. And again, it was something that had stuck in my brain. I have to tell you, when I went on the wall and I went to put those words, I didn't even have to think about it, because that was that was something inside of my heart that had hurt me their entire lives. Yeah. And it was just right there. And as you said, just waiting for somebody to give me the space to say it. So I want to thank you for allowing me to get that off of my heart and into your book. And thank you for picking my story.
Great way to end.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out this evening. Michele, thank you so much for the book. You will get to see her when you go up there and buy that book and get in line and have her sign it. Thank you again for coming out tonight.
Tam, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Get home safe.